Thank you very much indeed. Well, that very neatly gets rid of my first slide. So what am I going to talk about today? I've been given a wonderfully wide sheet of paper, which is energy security and prosperity. It's not really for sort of 15 minutes. It's very quickly something that can turn into a series of lectures. However, I'm going to give just some pointers from a slightly different perspective. I will preface it by saying it's not going to be quite as rosy as the one that was given to us by Trevor a few moments ago, but does at the same time, it's given me a chance to really think about the absolute imperative of renewable energy. And my first comments are directed across renewable energy generally, because there are big challenges to that sector. And at the end, I'll touch on some of the issues for marine energy. First of all, we'll just deal with the, if you like, the spirit of the times. Trevor mentioned it. Basically, forget global warming. That's off the agenda now. Here we are charging towards 4 degrees. The government within, I think it's within DEC, they had a team of 38 people looking at how the UK would adapt to climate change. That's been cut to 6. There's a message there. Cost, cost, cost. Cost is all that matters. And where are we going to apply capital? And we know the government is broke. There's a lot of competition for investment. And shale gas is there. It's been touted, not necessarily by the government, but maybe elements within Treasury, etc., that it's their get-out-of-jail-free card. I question whether it really is. Nuclear. Nuclear is an interesting one because it has very similar characteristics to renewable energy. It has very high upfront costs. There's a lot of capital got to be deployed right at the beginning, and it has benefits down the track, but it has this problem of the big upfront cost. Coal, well, carbon capture and storage. I'm slightly more skeptical of that. From most of the soundings I've taken and just looking at it, technically, I think that's going to be a tough one to meet both the carbon challenge and also the cost challenge. And then we've got gas, LNG. Now that's coming in. It's an interesting one because more gas is being found. There's a lot of gas being found, and there's, quote, we're going to have a gas glut, so why don't we just do that? It's, you know, low cost. The point is it's not sustainable, and it's not necessarily low cost. The opportunity, well, security of supply, that tends to be looked at purely in the context of differing places where you can buy, much like a business would look at it, as to where am I going to get my inputs. But I think there's another issue around that, which I'll touch on. And we do have to decouple from hydrocarbon price volatility. And I'm saying we'll just have a look at the nature of the economic system, because there's some interesting things to draw out of that which have implications for renewables. Well, the era of cheap energy may well be over. Whether or not we're at the peak, a resource peak, or whether we're behind it, or front of it, it doesn't really matter. The point is it's becoming much more expensive to get the energy. So there's going to be this crossover point sooner rather than later, I think, where renewables start looking very attractive compared to the fossil fuels. It'll become a much more balanced debate than it has been hitherto. We've still got work to do, but I think the era of cheap energy is over. An indicator of this is to just look at some of the energy return on energy invested. Whatever the marketing may be, whatever the economists say, ultimately, reality in the form of either geological reality or the straight physics, if you like, is going to tell us where we are. And I reckon that tidal is going to be somewhere up, probably north of wind. We're confident of that because we know the energy density there, and we can see where the cost curve will go. Gas. Well, you'll see that tidal could actually be ahead of gas. Wind is ahead of gas. And there's a question whether gas will stay at that sort of level or, in fact, is going to get more expensive. And then shale gas. Well, it's going to be about the same as shale oil. Remember, this isn't actually drilling for gas. This is mining for it. And a colossal amount of energy input has to go in. Never mind the environmental issues. It is not going to be cheap. We've also got to look carefully at the economy. And I took some time to look at where we are with the UK debt, because, of course, it's the biggest driver of policy at the moment. It's also, when you get down to it, one huge Ponzi scheme. And a Ponzi scheme falls apart if you don't have people coming in the bottom to support the thing. And that's where the demographics come in. And I'll show you some quite worrying curves on that. We've got resource depletion and constraint, and it's going to be one of the biggest issues going ahead. Sustainability is going to be important, and we've got to be very careful about the level of, in my view, the level of energy imports we are making. Because tie that to the debt, as I will show you, and it becomes a problem. Growth. Everybody bangs on about growth. Well, it's actually predicated on being able to put energy into the system. There's a very close link between GDP and energy. And also, we fueled it with debt. And there comes a limit with that. So where does the real growth come from? And you're looking at relative growth, not necessarily absolute growth. And we've got issues as to how we look at the economics. So let's look at the sovereign debt. Now, I've got a chart there, and it goes forward. Basically, it's showing different levels of sovereign debt. And the most important thing is that I had not fully appreciated, and I'm not sure anybody in this room had fully appreciated, that we are up there with Japan. Everybody else is behind us. Now, that means we're very fragile. And Japan has had 20 years of stagnation, trying to keep, it's had deflation, it's tried to inflate out, it has all sorts of lessons for us that we really ought to look over our shoulder and just take a note of, because these are implications for the UK economy. And if you then go to the structure of that debt, you'll see that we have a huge amount in financial debt. So asset values across the piece are very important. Now the light goes on. Why did the government decide it's going to fund first-time buyers? It needs the asset values to stand up. And you'll see also the shift there of government debt basically transferring and taking on financial debt. But then look at our savings ratios, okay? You'll see that ours is down, along with the United States, compared to the likes of Germany. And look what Ireland's done in the face of its difficulties. The saving ratio has gone right up. So the UK is in not a particularly good place. There are demographics. So remember what I said about the Ponzi scheme. Basically, there's not enough in the bottom of the pyramid to support all of this debt going forward and to keep the whole growth fueled by debt or asset value, etc., going. So, are we looking at growth? Well, I'm not so sure. That doesn't mean there can't be growth in particular sectors. And it does mean we're going to have to be very careful as to where we allocate our capital and how we think about the long-term feedbacks that come from that, the result of that investment. We've also got the issue, and I know, the point is we are bounded. There are limits to the growth. Whether we're reaching them now or not, maybe we're getting the first knockings, but we are going to reach them. And we can't have an economic system which is predicated on growth forevermore. And that does bring you to the sort of choices you make for where you make long-term investment. So a little bit on the nature of the economic system. And this is just things for you to have a think about as to where you see how renewables fit in. Natural capital. At the moment, our economic systems and our economic theory was all developed during a period of high growth, which was presuming we would have infinite resources and infinite energy because we were on that growth curve. So we only look at capital, labor, and land. I would argue that you have to build into that somewhere natural capital, because a lot of what we take for granted comes from the natural capital. And you have to build into that also energy, because energy is so critical to the economic system. We have an issue with discounting, which distorts the nature of the choices we make. And it's a very real one for businesses and finance, because they discount back. And so the true long-term costs, as well as the true long-term benefits, are all taken back to near. In other words, it predicates against high capital upfront investment. And business is going to look to where it gets its return over the period of time that it's driven to. And I'm talking the business, and you can get the impression from a lot of these sessions that the utilities are out there and they're all part of the game, and they're going to both give us a green economy and they're going to give us the electricity we want. No, they're not. What they're going to do is they're going to make returns for their shareholders. And they're going to apply their capital where they get the best return, and they're going to structure their businesses to manage the risk. That's what they do. That's all they do. And it is up to government, therefore, to set the rules to achieve that. And I'll show you that I don't think they've done that yet to get the money moving to where it needs to go. But it has a duty to address that market failure properly and to think about the long-term impacts, economic impacts for the country. Well, we've got the old economics. You've got a linear world, and it assumes a tendency to equilibrium. I've said it ignores energy and natural capital, and there's a presumption that it'll go there. It's very interesting. Look at the forecasts. We have forecasts which the EU have produced for growth in the EU, and those are those wonderful straight lines. I mean, God, those spreadsheets must have been quite easy to produce, actually, by the economists in there. But then you have some other forecasts which tend to look more sensibly at the realism, and you're not showing an awful lot of growth there. But I can't believe the ones that are going up. Thank you. So the new economics, what are the new economics? Well, there are quite a few people, and indeed some of them are government advisors, thank goodness, who are beginning to challenge the very basis of the economic models that our friends in the Treasury are using, and to be frank, with the Bank of England as well. There has to be, it's rooted in reality, it's maths-based, and it's looking at a non-linear world. There's some lovely pictures there which I think are based on Mandelbrot sets or whatever, and you presume financial instability. And if you think about it, with the level of debt we've got, we're balancing something on a tightrope here. And it could go either way, to inflation or deflation. Don't know which, but it's fundamentally, because of the level of debt, it's going to be unstable. So you're dealing with different circumstances. But this is why I think renewables are an absolute strategic imperative. If you look at it and think about it, my belief is that energy policy is utterly critical to everything else because of that link between GDP and energy. So when you think about it, your economic policy is going to be determined by that because it's the link with GDP. Your industrial policy will be linked by that because it's about the infrastructure you're producing. It's about the manner in which the energy is produced and the cost of that energy and what that means for our competitiveness. Transport policy. Well, we're going to need to, very strongly, we need, for instance, gas, the fossil fuels, in transport, in my view, because it's very difficult to substitute away from them. There's a lot of talk about electric cars, and that's all terribly exciting, but the fact of the matter is that it's unbeatable to put that 70 litres of diesel in your tank in terms of both a store of energy and it's homogeneous, it's easy to get around the place. It is unbeatable. Batteries, in terms of power density, are nowhere near that. Nowhere near. So we've got to move away from using fossil fuel in areas where we don't need to do it, which is electricity generation, so that we can save them, as they're constrained, into areas where we absolutely need them. People forget about food, for instance, all right? And that, it has a huge fossil fuel input. We're going to need it. Defense policy is driven by what you have to protect in terms of vital inputs. So if we have a massive reliance on imported gas for our energy, it's self-evident that is going to feed a defense policy, foreign policy. And of course, you've got to have some money left over. It feeds your welfare policy. So energy policy and getting it right is probably one of the most critical things the government needs to do. The geopolitics, some of this has been touched on, and in fact, the Bloomberg presentation earlier was very interesting because it showed where the growth is coming in renewable energy investment, and it's in Asia. So we've got the emerging great powers, new emerging great powers, China and India. They're securing resources, and we are looking just to go to the market to get resources. They're going for energy, raw materials, they're thinking about food, they're thinking about water. They still have very high growth rates, and their domestic market is developing, which is going to increase their energy consumption. And they have the growth compared to the EU. They're therefore pulling in the capital because it's an investment environment where there's a greater chance of seeing growth. Gas, there's plenty around, but at what cost? The UK, meanwhile, in terms of its overall thinking, is withdrawing. And we're focusing on we've made the healthcare system sacrosanct, we've made welfare, and in fact foreign aid sacrosanct. So every other department, including Trevor's, is under the cosh from Treasury to save money because we're feeding these things. And just go back to that demographic again. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So the current situation with energy, the banks frankly are dead, and any terms you can get from the banks are pretty hopeless. They're just rebuilding their balance sheets, a little bit trite, but it's at our expense. The government, I don't think, is fully recognizing the problem because we're not seeing this wall of investment coming in that we need. They are sleepwalking to an energy crunch in 2015-16. That has been forewarned, not just by me, you don't need to listen to me, listen to the outgoing CEO of Ofgem, and there are others that are talking about it. As I say, the green credentials, in my view, are in shreds. The greenest government ever, you must be joking. And the government funding for the housing market, well, oh God, talk about pouring petrol on a fire. And then look at priorities, just a small thing here. And Trevor painted a very good picture, and I know that other parts, particularly the Scottish government, are putting funding in. But we're trying to build an industry here, and it's got to be a really serious industry, and it's got to suck in billions. Yet, Wave and Tidal, 20 million, the Mead Fund. That actually was an increase from 42 million, which was the MRDF, just in place before they came into government. But of course, at the stroke of a pen, we're allocating £80 million to celebrate the start of that high point of human endeavor, the First World War. That's an awful lot of brasso. So, we have policy. Well, I'm less sanguine about the EMR. All that we're getting is that it's causing an investment hiatus at the moment. It is very complex. It seems to be targeted to find a way to make nuclear happen. The renewables are not content about it. Indeed, I'm not hearing that the utilities are particularly content about it. So it feels like something of a slow motion train smash at the moment. But it's causing an investment hiatus at the moment. And that's the perception externally as well. I was in Ireland recently, and they're saying, what do you mean you've got an energy policy? We're also giving tax breaks for shale gas. So here we are, fossil fuel, fully developed technology, all there, but we're giving tax breaks. And we're going to take out of the levy control framework, which was fundamentally there to support renewables. It was announced by DEC to support renewables, focused largely on offshore wind and then others to come through. Oh no, sorry, capacity payments for gas are coming out of that. So that means we're subsidizing another fully developed technology through capacity payments for gas-fired power stations. The EU ETS has failed recently, so we don't even have something in there which is giving you support for it. And there's no carbon target now, so why do you have to go for renewables? Witness the fact that the ROC is currently trading at its buyout price. Look at it from a utilities point of view. Well, ROC trading at the buyout price of £40. They were looking at it holding roughly, and this indeed was the basis of the 5 ROCs that we had from Marine as well, at around £50 a megawatt hour. Well, it's not holding at that, so there's a 20% reduction. If you take that with the increase in capital costs, the spark gap for offshore wind is not looking particularly good at the moment. Couple that with the fact that to do it, you've got to allocate about £4 million a megawatt from your balance sheet, compared to going for gas, which is £600,000 a megawatt. You have a pad, you have no consenting issues, and all you need is a set of jump leads to shove it on the grid. And you will get that piece of equipment probably fully supported, fantastic warranties. All you do is feed the gas in and make the electricity. And best of all, if the gas price fluctuates in the future, you toddle along to Ofgem and say, sorry, Gov, I've got to put my prices up. So you pass on risk to the consumers down the track, whereas renewables would at least give you a much less price volatility, far better certainty into the future as to what they are. So from a utility point of view, an investor point of view, we've set the circumstances for going for the gas. Now, we need gas, but we also need the renewables. So what's the opportunity for prosperity? Yep. I'll cut the end bit. Investors need returns, and at the moment, interest rates are low. There's a need for it. Pension funds, with an aging population, need returns. They need to slew towards stable income-producing assets. These could be very good. They need to find high relative growth. Renewables can offer that. They need to put weight of money to work. The projects and the scale of the projects is exactly the right place to do it. And they need political stability for the long-term infrastructure investment. The UK can actually offer that. But do you inflate or do you deflate? You have to, if we go to deflation, you don't invest, you sit. If we go to inflation, you must invest because your money is devaluing in the bank. Government, I think they'll have to inflate, but this is the trick. If they inflate, interest rates go up. That's what I mean about it being very, very delicate. If interest rates go up, you trigger deflation. You've got a problem. Also, your balance of payments. Because your currency goes down when you inflate, then because we're dependent on imports, suddenly your imports have gone up. So you have a triple whammy. Our dependency on gas is going up, we're vulnerable to the gas price, and our rate of exchange is going down, when we actually want to be turning the balance of payments the other way. Renewables, that's the answer to it, okay? We stabilize the cost of energy, we give security of supply, and we need to do it because the debt's driving us to it. I've talked about, last thing really, given that you're closing me down. Just a note, it is not all bad out there. We need the right policy framework because there's a lot of money searching for exactly these things. Others have got it. Goldman Sachs are, all over their website, they're intending to invest 40 billion worldwide in renewables. Now, if Goldman's are looking at it, isn't that the best indicator of the lot that this is a sensible place to go? Get the policy framework right. They've got it. We just need government to make sure that that 40 billion, or a good portion of it, is moving in our direction. I'll stick at that. Thank you.